I've been dying to get today's guest on this podcast since late last year, but like two werewolves passing in the night, we have not been able to make that happen until now. I'm honored to be joined by Janine Pipe, the author of Sausages, The Making of Dog Soldiers, which, as of the time of this recording, is just about to celebrate its 1 year anniversary. And Dog Soldiers, the film by Neil Marshall, is celebrating its 21st anniversary. So I have a bit of a history with this film, which is kind of a non-history, Janine.
Yeah.
My dear friend Chad, this is one of his favorite films and possibly his favorite horror movies. And for about 20 years, he tried to get me to watch it. And I was like, Dog Soldiers is a werewolf movie. I don't know about dogs and soldiers and whatever. I didn't
Yeah.
watch it until Scream Factory put out a 4K of it last year, and I watched it. And I did a deep apology to my friend Chad for having missed out on one of the best horror action movies that I've ever seen. It's a dear favorite, and I understand the fandom that went into writing this book, Sausages. So that's my experience. Tell me about your experience. Who are you? How did you go from being a horror fan along with, a person with a day job and a family and all of that to writing a book about one of your favorite films to making films yourself, stepping into the world of shorts, starting a production company, collaborating with Neil Marshall. I don't know if we can talk about all this in an hour, but I want to try. Janine, first of all, how you doing? I'm going to stop talking. And what's your story?
Oh my God, where the hell do I start? I'm very well, thank you. So yeah, Janine Pipe, an author, producer, director, a little bit of everything, fingers in all sorts of different pies. But first and foremost, what I always say is that I'm a fan, a horror fan, and a lifelong fan as well, which I owe to my dad. Like a lot of us, I grew up in the 80s, and my dad would tell, like, would sit me down on his knee and he would tell me ghost stories and like lore and legends, because I grew up in a place called Somerset in England. And we had a lot of history, a lot of King Arthur legends and all those kind of things. We've got lots of ley lines around, so there's all kinds of like spiritual stuff that goes on in that kind of area of the country anyway. And my dad absolutely loved horror. He was a big fan of Hammer horror, so he used to show me those kind of like, the classics and all of that. And he was also a Stephen King fan, so the very first book I read was his, Salem's Lot, when I was 10 years old. And I'm not going to say that I fully understood the whole story at 10 years old, but I can remember reading it and thinking, there's something to this. I've moved on from my Roald Dahls and my Enid Blytons and all that kind of stuff now. There's something really good here. And it coincided with watching my first proper horror film at 10, which was Fright Night. And I can remember lying in bed and just hearing like a tap, tap, tap on the, which obviously wasn't really happening, but I could hear it on the window and thinking, oh my goodness. And I was only 10, so I was frightened, but also quite enjoyed that feeling of being frightened as well. And it just all progressed from there. Kind of like went through the normal teenage years of, we didn't have Goosebumps over here during my childhood, but we did have the next ones like point horror. So I discovered those as a teenager and started reading them alongside all of the Stephen Kings and Dean Koontz and Clive Barkers and James Herberts and all of those kind of things. Along with watching as much horror as I could find. We were also moving into X-Files territory and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and stuff like that. So just everything that I was consuming around that time was just, full on genre based. Also, I'd always wanted from a very young age to be a police officer. That was all I'd ever wanted to do. And my parents were very encouraging with that. But we used to watch a lot of crime as well. So along with the horror stuff, there was a lot of serial killer, true crime, Silence of the Lambs, Thomas Harris, all that kind of stuff. So it's just like my entire life was just completely and utterly filled with all of this kind of, and Halloween wasn't really a very big thing over here in the UK when I was growing up either, but sort of again through my teenage years discovering that sort of like Salem and places like that, and really wanting to know about all this kind of stuff. That ended up that when I got married, our honeymoon, we went to New England and Boston specifically because I'd always wanted to go to Salem and do all of that. So just everything. Thankfully, my husband enjoys horror as well. So otherwise, that
I
could
was
have
going
been
to
a
say, was that a
toxic
big
marriage.
conversation, or was he?
Yeah. If our very first date when we were at university was to go and see oh what on earth was it? It was some terrible horror movie which I can't even think what it was now, but it was like in the very early 2000s when there was that spate of just just horrors constantly. Stigmata, that was it.
All right, yeah.
Wasn't one of the best horror films. I don't know if I've ever seen it again, but right from the start we were always watched horror films together on date nights and things, so yeah, thank goodness. But all of this love of horror was just there as a fan. I was really consuming it as much as I could, but I never ever considered doing anything with it. Like I said, I joined the police, and that obviously took over. That's a kind of job that is your job and takes over your life as well, so you can't really be a police officer and do other things. So I did that for a while, and then I became a mum, and I left the police when I became a mum because I wanted to be a full-time mum. And then all of a sudden, I had some free time on my hands, as much free time as you can have when you're a parent, anyway. And I had always enjoyed writing when I was at school. English was my favourite subject. And along with criminology at university, I did some English electives, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And it kind of got to this point where I thought, do you know what? I wouldn't mind. This was around about 10 years ago, and blogging was starting to become a thing on, lots of people were starting up blogs about anything and everything. And my other love in life is Disney. Absolutely Disney mad. And a lot of people can't quite put the two together. They're like, how can you be into all your blood and guts and then love Mickey Mouse? But actually, there's a lot of horror fans and Disney fans that, there's things that overlap.
Well, I mean, just about every Disney film of note starts off with at least one dead parent, so there's not much of a stretch.
Exactly. And my favorite ride's the Haunted Mansion, and the Tower of Terror and all that kind of stuff. So it still goes. Anyway, I'd start, so rather than going into horror blogging, because I didn't really know if that could be a thing, I started blogging and writing about our trips to Disney, and specifically taking a little one over to Disney, sort of traveling from the UK over to Florida and all that kind of stuff. And I actually got paid to do a bit of writing for that. And that was kind of where it all started, writing wise, because I suddenly had some experience of published writing, albeit within travel writing, but it was still something that I could use as evidence. And then it just sort of hit me that, why don't I just write something? Why don't I just write a story? And I'm not really sure where the inspiration came from. It just kind of like one day I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to write a ghost story. I love all this kind of stuff. I read all the time. I watch films all the time. Why don't I try something? So I went down the fiction route, first of all, and started writing short stories. And then you sort of think to yourself, oh, are these good enough for anybody else to ever look at? And we got into we're just about to hit the pandemic now, so all of a sudden, again, more free time because we're homeschooling and nobody can work and all this kind of stuff. So I'm sat at home, and there's lots of calls all over the internet for people that are writing specifically lockdown stories and things, and if you submit your story to this anthology, we'll publish it and whatnot. So I started just trying off little bits and pieces like that. And people were actually interested in the way that I wrote. They liked what I was writing. And it all just spiraled from there, really, really, really quickly. So my first published story was the start of 2020. So when you think that really that's only a few years ago, and I've got to this,
Right.
it's crazy, absolutely crazy. But that's very much my kind of ethos as well, is that you can't wait around for things. You've got to try and make these things happen for yourself. If you don't try it, you don't know what's going to happen. Your biggest regrets will always be the things you don't do and all of that kind of cliche stuff. And once I kind of got the ball rolling, I was like, you know what, I'm really enjoying this. I'm really enjoying that people seem to like what I'm doing, and I really enjoy supporting other people and all of that kind of stuff. And I found a community and everything, and it all just snowballed really, really quickly. And then all of a sudden, here I am.
Well, okay, that's the writing portion of it. which is all very cool. But I think we kind of skipped over sausages, because we went from like your short
Yes.
stories to sausages. Now, I understand being a horror fan and kind of growing up. I don't want to give away ages here, but I feel like we're right in the same, like you're describing your childhood and movie experiences to me. I'm like, yeah, we're like parallel tracks there. Um, but as far as, Dog Soldiers came out in 2020, sorry, I know my
2002.
years, 2002. I'm not, I went to art college. I'm not good at math. But so in 2002 is kind of later on in the horror upbringing,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
what was it about this film and Neil Marshall, who would go on to do, some amazing things, starting out with a pretty amazing debut, but it seems like this is one of your favorite films of all time. I mean, you
Mhm.
wrote an obsessive, in-depth fans perspective book that covers everything from concept all the way through post-production. You interview just about everybody. You have like
Yep.
scene by scene breakdowns and storyboards and stuff. What was it about this that really captured your imagination and your horror fandom to the point where you're like, I have to tell everybody about this and go down that rabbit hole of finding everything out that I can and sharing it with the world?
It's a really like there's no kind of like big wow moments or anything with it. So my first experience of watching Dog Soldiers was back in 2002, and it was theatrically released in the UK. And I wish I could say I was sat in a theatre and I watched it, but it wasn't. I was sat in a bar in Corfu with my lovely husband, and the football had been playing on at this bar, an illegal feed, no doubt, on this big like white sheet that they had behind the bar. And all of a sudden, the football was all over, and people were still, drinking away. And they put this horror film on again, just this horrific bootleg. It was one of those typical pirated things where you could actually see like the shadows of people getting up as they were walking through the cinema and stuff. But it was Dog Soldiers, and I didn't really know very much. But no, hand on heart, I'd never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it. We've just kind of sat having a few drinks, and this werewolf movie comes on, and werewolves have always been my favorite monster anyway. So I'm kind of like, oh, this looks quite interesting. And if I hadn't have joined the police, the other thing I was always interested in was joining the army. So there was the military, and I was an army cadet for a while as a teenager as well. So there was the military aspect, which immediately intrigued me. And I can remember just watching as well as you could on this sheet that was being beamed on, and just the only thing that I could distinctly remember was the whole sausages part. And I remember thinking to myself, this is absolutely amazing. And then a couple of years later, it must have been around 2005, because we did go and see The Descent at the cinema. And after watching that, I can remember we went to Blockbuster, and I was like, oh, okay, Neil Marshall, I've got it. And I found I'd like to think it was still a VHS, but it was probably a DVD. Anyway, but we found Dog Soldiers and rented it. And it was just as amazing, if not better, than I had remembered and whatnot. Now, all of a sudden, I had two films, this was 0 for 2 for this director. And that was it. Back from 2005, I kind of like followed Neil's career, but as much as you could back in those, it wasn't like the internet was there, but it wasn't like we were all, like on it all the time kind of thing. And social medias were all just coming into sort of being and everything. And it was only when I started writing and sort of submerging myself into the horror world. So we're going back to 2019, 2020, when I started doing things like meeting other people, talking to other people, going on to podcasts and things like that. Something that often comes up in conversation is, what's your favorite horror film? And it was always Dog Soldiers. And I could just, it became a running joke, even with people sort of like I was just like met on Twitter and whatnot. Oh, Janine's on that. She's bound to talk about Dog Soldiers. She'd be like, if someone was like, I'm going on holiday, she'd be like, oh, watch Dog Soldiers before you go, kind of thing. It just became that kind of thing. But again, very informally. I'd never spoken to anybody that had anything to do with it. And then again, completely and utterly by chance, I'd sort of written myself this bucket list of things I'd wanted to do. Writing a book about Dog Soldiers was not on it, because I never thought for a million years something like that would happen. But writing an article for Fangoria was on it. I thought, like Fangoria is the god of all horror magazines. I'd love to have my name in print. I'd love to write something for them. And as I was thinking of things to pitch to Phil over there, I realized that it was going to be the 20th anniversary of Dog Soldiers. And it seemed, it's like, oh, this is serendipity. If I pitch to Phil, if I can write a celebratory retrospective of Dog Soldiers, maybe he'll be into it. And he was, obviously, but he said, but I don't just want your words on why you love it. Let's try and get an interview with Neil in there as well, and some photos and things, because obviously Fangoria is very much a picture-based magazine. Let's try and get some, if he's got anything that's never been seen and that kind of stuff, that'd be even better. So all of a sudden I'm sat thinking, okay, I've got this amazing opportunity. What if Neil says no? Because you just never know, And first of all, how the hell am I going to get hold of Neil Marshall?
That was my question. Yeah. Like, is it, yes, great, go do this all on your own and let us know if you come back with something, or did they give you any resources or tips or anything? Or
no, a lot of these magazines, they don't, I mean, some of them are, if you're a staff writer, I imagine that, you have endless resources and things, but if you're just pitching something, then it's very much up to you to, maybe it's a test to see how much you want to do. I don't know. But luckily I managed to find out Neil's agent details. And within a day or so, the agent had come back to me and said, yeah, Neil would like to talk to you about this.
Wow.
Once I'd picked myself up off the floor, I was like, oh God, now I've actually got to talk to him. And I was it was just a phone call, not even like a video or anything, just literally a phone call. Thank God, because I was so nervous. I think I was bright red. I was sweating. I was like palpitating. I was just so nervous because this man was like my movie god. He was kind of like my hero and everything. And for about the first 2 or 3 sentences, he's so down to earth, and he just made me feel really comfortable and at ease, and almost like I was actually doing him a favor, rather than him doing me a favor by accepting this interview. And we just had a really good time. And we were talking about all sorts of other bits and pieces, he was throwing in movie recommendations, and we had such a good time. And then I was just like, at the end, do you think it might be possible to put me in touch with a couple of other people just to get a quote? And he was like, yeah, sure. And within minutes, he'd sent me a contact for Sean Pertwee and Darren Morfitt and all this kind of stuff. And it just really snowballed from there. And once we'd done that, I remember thinking to myself, that was amazing. This article is absolutely fantastic. Neil had found all these photos that we could use for Fangoria, but it was 2,000 words. And 2,000 words isn't very much on something that you feel that you could talk endlessly about. So I actually said to Neil, thank you ever so much for everything. This is amazing. I would really like to talk to you more about this. I'm not really sure how even. Maybe we could talk about the possibility of me writing a biography on you or something like that, looking at, all sorts of different things. And Neil said to me, he just got the Clark Collis book, You've Got Red on You, which is the Shaun of the Dead companion.
Yeah.
The making of Shaun of the Dead. And he said, I've just got this book, this amazing book of Shaun of the Dead. And there's quite a few comparisons between Shaun of the Dead and Dog Soldiers anyway, like from the times that they were made and where they were made and all that kind of stuff. It's a beautiful book. I've always wanted someone to write a making of Dog Soldiers book. Do you fancy doing that? And we're just like, I'm sorry, what? did you hang on a minute? Did you, my God, just ask me, little old me, if I want to write the official making of book about this film? Yes, please. Yes, I think I would. And that's it. That's how it happened. And it just went from there. And now we're like mates, and he's EPing for me and stuff. It's mad.
I mean, it's a crazy, great story. Like, so at this point, you get the offer to kind of like collaborate on this making of Dog Soldiers book.
Yeah.
And it came out, really well. I mean, you're talking, this is like 2020 that you're doing the Fangoria thing and meeting Neil and everything. The book came out
2021. So
2021. Okay, so how did you
yes,
get this book out this quickly? This feels like a book when I'm reading it that was written over the course of years and painstaking interviews and flying all over the place to meet, actors in, Swiss chalets or something, but you cranked it
four
out in
months,
like a year.
four
Wow.
months,
Wait, 4
4 months.
months.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there a deadline, or was it just like you got the offer or the opportunity and you didn't want it to go to waste, so you started cranking on it so you didn't wake up from this dream or something?
It was a self-imposed deadline because we were talking about it. So the I first spoke to Neil, it would have been November 2021. So this kind of came about even like deciding to do this, and obviously then speaking to the publisher in the December, and I started writing it in the January. But I knew I wanted it to coincide with the anniversary, which is today, so the 10th of May. So I knew I only had that time frame, and it couldn't have been finished on the 10th of May because obviously it had to be sent to the publisher for proofreading, for edits, for all of those kind of things that happen once you've actually just put your words onto paper. And there was a hell of a lot of work putting it together as well because of all the like formatting it, because of all the photos and everything that had to be slotted into it. It was a big formatting job too. So I knew that I needed to finish it like sort of mid-April at the absolute latest. So yeah, when you think about it, that is just utterly ridiculous time frame which I imposed on myself. But because it was such a labor of love, because literally every single time I wrote something, I was excited to write the next. My husband would come down to me and he'd be like, Janine, it's nearly midnight. You need to stop writing now. You can come and do it again tomorrow morning, kind of thing. Me and the kid are going to bed now. You need to as well. But it really was like that. I just get so carried away in what I was doing, and because everything was just so much fun, it was so exciting. And I didn't meet anybody in person. I was able to do it all either over the phone or FaceTime and Zoom and that kind of stuff. And then I just because I'd recorded all of the interviews and then had to transcribe them all and that kind of stuff. But again, even though it was time consuming, I just loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I think that does come through in the book as well. You can tell that none of it was a slog. It was me going, oh my God, I'm so excited about doing this.
Did, even a self-imposed deadline? I mean, we've talked about, you've got a life outside of this project,
Yeah.
a husband and a kid, and
Yeah.
household responsibilities and
Yeah.
vacations. Well, I mean, probably weren't doing a lot of vacationing during the pandemic, but the point still stands. How
Mm.
did you carve out the time? Did you have a routine that you stuck to when you were working on the book? Like, okay, from 8 p.m. until, I guess, midnight when they come to get me, that's my
Yeah.
writing time. Did any of your, I guess, previous life as like a police officer, and I mean, in terms of like, I guess, investigating or just discipline, did that play into it? Did you feel like this was a culmination of everything that you've been kind of living up into that point?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Transferable skills, there's all those kind of things that it definitely, that's one of the reasons why I love interviewing people for things like this, is again the interviewing skills that I learned in policing. So it's not interrogation kind of thing. I'm not trying to get them to to confess to anything. But it's that same being able to, pick up on something that someone has said and draw more information out. And after I left the police, while my daughter was younger, I worked in a school as a teaching assistant as well. So that's a kind of like management, sort of like managing your own time and discipline and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there were lots of things that I had like in my wheel box, which I was able to, bring out and use. And yeah, it was just an awful lot of, no, I can't come and do whatever you need me to do today because I'm writing. There was a lot of that. But again, people were just like, yeah, don't bother inviting Janine out for coffee for 4 months because she's working on her like masterpiece.
Now, writing can be, especially I imagine during a pandemic, a very solitary experience. So, and this is your first, like, a really big break for you, working
Yeah.
with, your idol
Yeah.
essentially. Did you ever have those kind of moments of doubt, or like you got a deadline coming up, but you're 3/4 of the way through the stuff or whatever, and you're like, I'm not going to finish this, or who am I to write this book? I'm just a fan. I'm not a, crazy big pro author. He could have found anyone else for this, but why me? And how did you, if you had those moments, how did you fight through them? And what kind of support system did you have while you were working on Sausages?
The press itself, Encyclopocalypse, was very, very good with that kind of thing. So I might write a chapter and then send it over to either the managing editor or the guy that was formatting it, and just be like, is this actually okay? Is this going to be okay? And they were like, look, you already know that you're not writing this as a film critic. You're not writing this as a journalist. There's nothing that, you've never sold it as that. You're writing it as someone who is celebrating this and who loves it. So that is exactly how it comes across on the page. So that kind of gave me a bit of confidence. Right up until when I finished it and sent it across, I think I was still almost like in a dream. So I just wasn't even thinking about it. I just was enjoying it so much. And then once it was done, and that kind of like, you're out of the fever dream, there was definitely that, how are people going to react to this? Because people that like making of books and that watch the DVD extras and listen to directors' commentaries, they probably are those kind of people that want almost that dry, very much film school kind of approach to this. And I haven't got any of that. This is just conversational. There's lots and lots of golden nuggets in there that obviously all of the people had shared with me, but it's still done in that very informal tone. How are people going to react to it? And one of the first reviews that we actually got for it when it was still an arc was somebody criticizing that, saying, I was expecting, like a formal, this is such an amazing film with such a cult following. I was expecting a very formal, like, this is how this was done, this was how this shot was taken and whatnot. And it's not, it's like just a fan's written a long ass love letter. And it really knocked me for six. But then more and more reviews started coming in saying, I'm so glad that this book is written this way, because it is such a fun film. The camaraderie between the squaddies, it's almost like she was one of them, and she's carried on the tone of the film into the book. And I really like that she's put sort of personal anecdotes and bits and pieces in there. So thankfully, like 99% of people that have read it have enjoyed that I've written it from that point of view, but that I've always been upfront that I'm a fan. I love this. I'm going to talk about how much I love it all the way through. You'll be able to feel the love pouring off the pages. So if you want something that goes by shot of, this is how Sam set up the camera, and this is what they did here, and this is what they did, this is the lighting and the gels that they used, at that now I probably would know something about that, but at the time when I was writing it, I didn't know that. I didn't care about that. That wasn't the side of things that I was looking at. And thankfully most people were like, yeah, this is amazing.
If I might digress a bit, because there's a lot that you put out there that I want to kind of unpack. First of all, it is clear that it's from a fan's perspective. I don't mean to knock any fans, but did you ever watch Saturday Night Live with Chris Farley playing the
Yes.
super fan, where he would like interview Patrick Swayze and be like, remember that time you were in that movie? That was awesome. That's not the book that you wrote.
Yeah.
You are a fan, but you're also you can articulate and express that fandom in a way that's infectious to other people, rather than being an infection that other people might want to wipe off. The other thing is, of all the films, the book that person, that critic, whoever that was describing, sounds like something you'd apply to late stage Stanley Kubrick, or like a French art film. Dog Soldiers, I was listening to some of the commentary by Neil Marshall, and the way that you describe talking to him on the phone is the way that he comes across in that commentary. It's just a guy who decided one day, I can make a movie. Maybe I can't, but I'm going to try, because what else am I going to do? And it's such a scrappy production of, let's try this out, see if it works, and hey, we just happen to make a cult classic. I don't think you can write an academic book about it that's worth reading, really. And the third thing I'll say before I get back to you, I don't mean to railroad this, but a lot of that information that I think people would look for if they want more of a technical eye towards how the movie was made kind of comes across in some of the interviews. You know, they might be in kind of casual anecdotes, but the information is there. How do we put this together? You know, deadlines and setbacks and all that stuff. The information is there. It's just not written, you know, in a like a college essay format.
Yes, yeah. Oh, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Yeah, it's just I understand that point of view, but I mean, I just don't, you can't apply that to every single thing. I think you have to figure out what the work is, accept it on its own terms, and hopefully those things jive. Because, yeah, again, I think you wrote the perfect kind of book for what Dog Soldiers is. And it reminds me of something that Neil said on the commentary when he was trying to get the movie made and like floating the script around. And he was told that someone had said this was, you know, too much movie for a first time
Yes.
director. And, you know, turns out that wasn't the case. It might have been, it's kind of one of those cosmic tests. Like if someone says that to you with the script you've written and you kind of go away with your tail between your legs saying, well, I guess they were right, then, you know, perhaps filmmaking isn't for you.
Yes,
But
definitely.
if you take that as a challenge and say, done, let's get to work, then then you
Yeah.
become Neil Marshall, I guess, or Janine Pipe. Because one thing I do want to move on to, since I could talk to you for like 6 hours, we don't have that kind of time, is you are now a bona fide filmmaker, and that's a relatively recent development. You did some Indiegogo funding for not one, but in the last year, but two independent films, shorts, one of which you've filmed and I think is in post right now. That's Her, right?
Yeah.
And the other
Yeah.
one is Footsteps, which people can still support. I guess the campaign is over, but you can still get in on it. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Still in demand, they call it, because
Okay.
it targets. Yeah.
So, all right, you've written a book. Now you've got a production company and, you know, Pipe Screams, I should mention, which I
Yeah.
love that name. Tell me about deciding to make, you know, where were you when you decided to become a short filmmaker? And what was the first thing you did once you made that decision?
It's, it's when I talk about it, it's just I still be like, what, me? I'm doing this. It's just it just sounds so ridiculous. But it wasn't the reaction from the people that kind of said, oh, you know, this should have been written by someone that was a film journalist and who knew all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, doing the deep dive into it and specifically talking to people like Sam McCurdy, the DOP, and even Simon Bowles, who was the production manager, who talked about the intricacies of set designing and all this kind of stuff, it blew me away with how fascinating it was. And even though I knew that I would enjoy learning about how, you know, my most favorite thing in the world came together, I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed those kind of aspects as well. Again, like I said, coming from no film background whatsoever, yes, I was the kind of person that if I really enjoyed a film, I would listen to the director commentaries, I would watch the making ofs, and, you know, watch the cursed movies, documentaries, all of those kind of things. I've always enjoyed that, but again, never ever with that, oh, maybe I could do that. I'm the kind of person that can barely take a photo on my iPhone. You know, I've got no technical skills whatsoever. And it really, really intrigued me. And around the same kind of time, I just so happened to see a call out on Twitter for somebody who was trying to round up some writers for a found footage anthology that they wanted. So it was Sam Mason Bell, who's now a very good friend of mine, from Trash Art Films, and he had this idea that he wanted to make this found footage anthology, so a bit like VHS. And he was he put on Twitter looking for writers to get involved, because I've got this idea but nothing else at the moment, so if you're interested, get in touch and we'll have a writers room meeting and see where it goes. So I kind of like, oh, I like found footage, I could do that could be a good step into doing something filmy. So I got in touch with Sam and obviously told him everything that I'd done so far, and he was like, yeah, definitely, come on board and write one of the segments. And as we were getting towards the first meeting, I was like, I don't want to write a segment for this. I want to help make it. And I don't know, I'm not that kind of people always say to me that I come across as quite confident, and I'm sat in my office talking, or to a phone. Of course, you can have that kind of confidence when you're on your own, but when I'm out and about, it's a bit different. I can be quite shy. And certainly, I'm not the kind of, very British. We don't put ourselves forward for things and big ourselves up. That's not what us British people do. And all of a sudden, I said to Sam, can I be a producer? At that point, I didn't even really know exactly what being a producer would entail, but I was just like, I can't offer myself up as a director. That would be my, obviously, like wanting to be like Neil. That would be sort of like an end game thing. Everybody wants to be a director. I can't say, can I come in and direct something? Because that would be ludicrous. But maybe if I come on board as a producer, I can kind of learn the ropes from inside and start seeing how all of this comes together. And Sam, for whatever reason, he said that he saw like my drive, my determination and enthusiasm, and that all of that. And even though I had, no experience whatsoever, again, those transferable skills from policing and teaching and everything, because being a producer is really just like being a manager. It's managing people, it's managing budgets, it's making phone calls and saying we need this, we want that kind of thing. And he was like, yeah, come on board as a producer. Now that project is kind of like on a hiatus at the moment, but it put me in touch with this group of people, including Sam. And he just said to me one day, you keep talking about all these different things, and there's all these different, I'd been helping him with some scripts and doing some script doctoring and all these different bits and pieces. And I kept saying her about how what I'd really love to do is come on set one day just to kind of like follow people around and be like, wow, this is amazing kind of thing. And it's like, this is all well and good, but why don't you do something? And I was like, yeah, why don't I do something? And as soon as I had that kind of like, he was like, I'll come up. He's a DOP, so he'd bring all his cameras and his kit and whatnot. He's like, let's just make something. You write it, you direct it. I'll bring the cameras. We'll just make something. So because I had a plethora of short stories that I'd written, I was able to just choose one, because obviously I own the rights to them. So I was able to pick one of my short stories and just turn it into a script. And what I needed was something super, super basic, which was it's basically a one location. Because at this point, like you said before, I've got a family and a house and all of this kind of stuff. So I had to shoot this in my house. I knew that was kind of like, that was my remit. It was going to have to be shot in the house. And I had this story called Her, which is set in all we see to start with is it's set in like a prison cell, but it's not like a prison. It's just like, like a cell, a makeshift cell. So I knew that I could come up with that in my living room. And it's only two characters and hardly any special effects or anything like that. So it was the perfect first thing to be able to make. But I treated it like a huge, feature film. I shot listed it, I storyboarded it, I raised a little bit of money through Ko-fi. People made donations and whatnot. So I was able to buy, props and fake blood and, all of those kind of things. We got the actors up and we shot it. And we made a short film. And it's terrible. It's not terrible. That's what it did was we only ended up with about 5 or 6 hours. And I don't know if anybody's listening has ever tried to make a film in 5 or 6. It's almost impossible to do something like that. So and I learned lots and lots and lots of things. I made lots of mistakes and whatnot on it, but it's given me such a valuable experience ready to go forward for Footsteps that I know so much more. So I'm infinitely grateful. It is still in post at the moment. Had a local composer that very kindly has made some music to go on to it, and I've got somebody still editing it in bits and pieces. But it is coming together. But as I say, more than anything, it was the experience of making it. I loved doing it, and I also learned so much that going forward now I'm gonna be like a whole new person on Footsteps. And we made sure, from that experience, we've got 4 days for Footsteps, which hopefully will be plenty to shoot, because I think it's it's a 19-page script at the moment, but we need to make sure for festival requirements it can't be any more, including credits, than 15 minutes. So it's going to be quite tight anyway. But there's all these different bits and pieces, you know, already raring to go for Footsteps. So yeah, it was very much just a right place at the right time, putting myself forward, and all these different bits and pieces that just fell into place. And yeah, how the hell am I making films? I've got no idea. But what I like to always say to people is, if I can do it, if I can make a film, and if that's what you want to do, then go out and do it. Because if I can do it, anybody can.
I mean, it's really inspirational. And I've heard people kind of say that you can do anything, you just got to put your mind to it and just kind of go. But I mean, you're living proof that you literally can.
Yeah.
You know what, you've got the one film in post, you're getting ready to shoot another one.
Yeah.
Plus you're, I see you're constantly on Twitter, like, promoting stuff and like kind of celebrating horror and dog soldiers, and building this kind of community. How do you, I think I've asked this question when you were writing the book, how do you balance all of that? Do you have kind of set work hours, or are you constantly attached to your phone, like answering stuff, looking over footage, talking to the composer, or getting scouting locations, or how do you manage your just daily life at this point?
Well, I'm very lucky that at this point this is my full-time job. So I write for a podcast called Something Scary. And that, along with all of this and freelance bits and pieces, this is me now. This is what I do. So very lucky to be in that position. So basically, yes, I am while my daughter's at school. She's a teenager now, you know, so she has her long school hours and everything. I'm just constantly on my phone or on the computer doing bits and pieces. You see, like answering emails and whatnot. And for as much as things like Twitter in particular can be soul destroying and all of that, you know, with everything that goes on over there, for me, I find it absolutely imperative for networking and that kind of stuff. You know, I use it in a very appropriate kind of way, but also, as you just touched on there, I'm also very supportive. And I think and I've never done it as a transaction relationship, you know, like it's not like, oh, if I support you, will you support me? There's none of that. But, you know, I'll support something because I really, really like it, not because I ever expect any interaction back from anybody or anything like that. And I think just that kind of like my honest approach to everything, you know, and I will still say to every single person who says, oh my God, I can't believe you're making films. I'm like, I'm so lucky. I can't believe it. I'm a fan and I'm doing this. There's no ego or anything like that. You know, I haven't got to, don't talk to me, talk to my agent kind of stuff. And I'll never be like that because that's just not me. But yes, a lot of people have said, after I wrote Sausages, I had people come to me and say, you've inspired me. Now I'm going to approach my favorite filmmaker and see if I can do something similar. Or I've got a dream, you know, there's a football team that I really love and I'd love to write something about them. I'm going to go and approach them about that. And the same with the filmmaking. I've had other people say to me, I've always fancied making something. I'm going to do something on my phone. Doesn't matter if nobody ever sees it. I've always wanted to do it. And, you know, I'm very much like, if you write, you're a writer. If you make films, you're a filmmaker. It doesn't matter what kind of level it is or anything like that. And if you want to do it, then just go for it. Because if I say, you know, I'm 43, British, a wife and a mum, if I can do this, then there's so much potential for other people to go, do you know what? I really fancy doing something. Just don't be afraid, because if you don't shoot your shot, you'll never, ever know. The worst case scenario could have been in all of this that Neil's agent way back in 2021 said, sorry, he's not interested in talking to you. And then I've been like, oh, okay. And that would have been it. but at least I would have tried, kind of thing. If I'd never have, put myself out there and been like, hi, can I speak to Neil? It's for Fangoria, so that's really cool. And by doing that, it's led to all of this. And it's just, if you've got someone that you want to get in touch with, then just try appropriately and professionally.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Did that Fangoria article ever come out? Because you mentioned they wanted 2,000 words, but you like this is much bigger than that. But so you did put out the piece, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, as far as, well, first of all, you said your age. I didn't. I was kind of dancing around that because you never want to ask people their ages, especially on a podcast necessarily. But I'm about 3 years older than you, and you're giving me hope. But I mean, like, here's the thing: if you mentioned that if Neil's agent had said, no, bugger off or whatever, do you think that would have obviously that yes and the subsequent phone call opened up a lot of doors again, just kind of cosmically, like one thing led to another. But if they had said no, where do you ever think about where you would be? Do you think that you would have found another avenue to pursue these creative endeavors, or would you have just gone to do some other interest?
I definitely, by that point, I'd already had my own fiction published, including a short story collection. So I think if I hadn't have gone down this route with the non-fiction and obviously moving into films and scripts and stuff, I think I probably would still be writing, but probably maybe just still fiction. I don't know that I would have gone, oh, I can't write about dog soldiers, that's fine, I'll just pick another film and do that, because I don't, although there's lots and lots of other things which I really love, there's not anything else that I have the passion for, because you can only have that amount of passion for one thing, otherwise you'd be worn out.
Yeah.
So yeah, if Neil's agent had said no, and Fangoria had said, oh, well, never mind, thanks, we'll get someone else to do something, I like to think I would still be writing, but I definitely wouldn't. Making a film would never have crossed my mind in a million years.
Well, so let me ask you this now. You are, in various stages of two shorts. Is your objective to one day become a feature filmmaker, or what do you envision for yourself creatively? And given your journey over the last few years, it may be an impossible question because everything seems to have just not fallen into your lap, but just like these unexpected avenues. Like you take one step, and then all of a sudden there's this 3,000-mile path that's sort of laid out to you because you were brave enough to take that step. So what do you envision for yourself as in your future, or do you think it can be?
A feature film is definitely something which I would love to do. Having seen behind the curtain and all of that, it is much, much harder, especially to get the funding for it in the first place. That's a massive thing. And time-wise, at the moment, as I say, being a wife and a mum to a 13-year-old, I couldn't say, guys, I'm off to shoot a film for 8 weeks. See you later. So I'm not quite at a time in my life where I could do that. However, she's 13. In 5 years, hopefully she'll be going off to university and all that kind of stuff. And in 5 years, I'll have a wealth of experience of other bits and pieces. Maybe then I'll be in a really good place to be able to, make a feature film, because I'll have a lot more experience behind me. I'll have hopefully met more people that to get funding or something like that won't just be a pipe dream. It might be something which is possible. And the more and more I work with Neil, obviously, I'm going to say, and I've said this a million times, my ultimate fantasy would be to work on a film with Neil. I mean, of course it would, but he's never co-directed with anyone before, so that's another thing. But yeah, of course, it's the dream, but realistically and logistically, there's lots of hurdles to get to that. And if it doesn't become a reality, it's not the worst thing that could happen. I can still always say, look what I've done. And making shorts is really fun anyway. maybe I'll get to be part of an anthology like VHS or something like that one day. You know, that's another step. TV works another thing as well, because obviously that's very short, because you just direct an episode of something. So there's lots of different possibilities. The next thing that is for definite is that Neil and I are going to write the making of The Descent, ready for 2025, and this time we are co-writing as well, so that will be,
Wow.
yeah, even more exciting. So it won't just be, it will, my side of it will still be very much, oh my god, I love this film, it's amazing, Neil's amazing, woo, kind of like fan point of view and everything, but I'll be writing with Neil. So for anybody that didn't like the sausages because it was too, oh my god, I love this, Neil will be able to put his kind of like technical perspective into it as well. So that will be really interesting.
Well, first of all, congratulations. That's great news. I hope that whatever that collaboration leads to in terms of the voice of the book, that you still are able to retain the essence of the person who wrote Sausages in, the Descent book. Because I think despite what that one person or that 1% or whatever might have said about it, I think that's what kind of makes it special is, fans want to, that's part of the dream of being a fan, right? Of like loving something so much, you're like, oh, I'd love to make this, or I'd love to know all about it. So yeah, that stuffy academic commentary is hogwash. So I hope that you and Neil, who are both, you're both fans, you're both kind of, I mean, I don't want to be presumptive about them, but you feel like kind of geeks, like regular people, just really into something.
Yes.
You just
Oh
wound up
yeah.
being able to make that your living, that comes
Yeah.
across in the page. I can't wait. And I have to ask, are you going to try and beat your writing time from last time? So it's 2025. So you're going to start around like what, October of 2024?
No, we've already started reaching out to people, and so we're kind of in pre-production for that now. So no, I said that definitely this time, as much as I loved doing it, it's definitely not ideal doing something in that really tiny frame, and especially with it being co-written, and with Neil like being away a lot and doing his own films and things, we needed more time. So it's actually quite nice to know that we've got a huge chunk of time ahead of us for this one.
Two kind of closing questions. One, as far as Neil, has he been, I mean, you're collaborating now, he's an executive producer on Footsteps. Has he been like a mentor to you? Have you shown him like the dailies on her, or, has he given advice to you on, the steps to take, or is he just more of an encourager? Like, I know you guys worked on the first book together, and he kind of reached out and said, hey, you want to do this, but how closely have you worked together? And do you ever feel nervous about like asking advice or seeking help from someone who is like your idol?
So I don't feel nervous asking him for advice, because we've got to a stage in the relationship where we are friends. But I'm very reticent of how busy he is. So he kind of goes like any big filmmaker, obviously he was filming Duchess last year, which is his gangster film. So he was kind of rapping and on post and all of that kind of stuff for that. And writing and finishing everything on Compulsion, which is what he's away in Malta filming now, which is erotic thriller. So, and obviously he's been away for nearly 2 months doing because he went over to Malta early to get everything ready for that. So yes, he is definitely a mentor, and yes, I definitely ask him for advice, but at the same time I never want to be saying to like take the piss, so I never kind of like ask too much of him, because I know how busy he is, and I'm never kind of offended if he's just like I just can't answer that at the moment because I'm doing something else. So he gives me what he can, but I never want to be in that position where he's like, oh god, there's a message from Janine, what does she want now, kind of thing. So it's very much, but it's two-way. I read all his scripts now, which is amazing.
Wow.
So
Does he
yeah.
take your notes and everything? Like,
Yeah.
wow. So you're like your peers now. This is wonderful.
It's just madness. And I'm always saying to him, right, what have you got for me next? And he's like, because he's got, I reckon, probably close to about 50 scripts that he's written over the years, you know, that just are kind of sat there. Some of them are just still first drafts. He's got sort of like treatments and pitch decks and all sorts of things and I've seen quite a few of them. So things that like aren't even quite finished, he's like, go on then, I'll send that to you, see what you think. And so that side of things is just like, I'll be like, obviously I don't tell anyone about it or whatnot, but I'll say to my husband, just reading another one of Neil's scripts that nobody's ever seen before. You're the only person I can brag to about it, but yeah, so we've got very much that kind of relationship, which again I never ever take for granted. And the one thing which and people are only human, I do get asked a lot to pass it, like, can you, I've got this script, I wrote this thing about werewolf, can you show it to Neil? Or oh, I'd really love to get Neil on the show, you know, like he'd be a great guest, can you give me his phone number or something? And a lot of the times, if it's somebody saying like, can you send this to Neil, I'll be like, no, I can't. I will not do that. I'm not overstepping. If you've got something that you think you want to send him, find his agent the same as I did and go through the, you know, the correct ways to do it. I'm not doing that because that's not fair on me either. And if somebody wants to interview him or speak to him on a podcast or something like that, I'll say, great, that's brilliant. I'll pass your details on to him. If he's interested, he can get in touch with you. But there's no way in hell I'm breaking any kind of confidence or trust
Right.
by passing on anything. But yeah, I have had quite a few people kind of like trying to, like, people that I don't, if it's someone that I know really, really well, I would still always ask Neil's permission first, but I might say, oh, can a mate of mine message you, kind of thing. They'd be like, yeah, of course, that's absolutely fine. But if, sometimes these are people that I've never had any interaction with, apart from, you know, we might follow each other on Twitter or something. So, and they just see me as a means to Neil. And I do understand that. I get that. But at the same time, it's just like, don't do that. No,
Right.
it's just not right.
Well, I mean, there goes my last question. No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
no, first of all, I mean, that's great that you've got that integrity because it can be a weird place to be in. You know, social media is supposed to be social and not like social climber media, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my last question, you know, you mentioned your daughter, and when you said like in 5 years when she goes to university or whatever, maybe I can go make my movies. And I thought, would it be cool if maybe she didn't go to university and she ended up like crewing for you on your first feature? But then I thought, this takes me back to kind of the beginning of our conversation. You know, you were a horror kid. Your dad was very much into horror. You're into horror. Your husband's into horror. Is there any awkwardness around the house? Like, is your daughter like, I can't stand these scary, silly movies? Or is she a horror kid too?
If I say to you that in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going up to London to do the Saw escape room experience, and she was so upset and angry that she couldn't come with me because she's only 13 and you have to be, I think it's at least 16 if not 18. She's a horror hound as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, she loves horror. Yeah, she can't wait. She's really excited because the new Scream has just landed like in the UK on demand kind of thing. So she's like, Mum and Dad, we are watching the new Scream film. Yeah, she loves it. She
Have
is a horror through and through as well.
have you watched it yet?
No, not yet. Can't wait. We're going probably at the weekend. We'll all sit down and watch it together. Yeah.
I don't want to get anything away. I was kind of reluctant, you know, because I'm like, it's Scream 6, but I
Yeah.
really, I really enjoyed it.
I've heard that, yeah. And we take, you know, I'm a big fan of franchises anyway, and very much you kind of take them with a pinch of salt, you know, like by the time you've got to Friday the 13th 100 and Halloween 100 and whatnot, they've been there, they've done that, you know, they're not going to be as good as the originals and whatnot, but I just take them with a pinch of salt and enjoy them for what they are. And very much with horror films now, especially, um, it's amazing how you watch them through a different, a different set of goggles, a different POV. So now I'm going back and watching things like we rewatched Deliverance a few nights ago. Hadn't seen it for years and years and years. And I was struck by how beautiful the film is. And that sounds like ridiculous when you think about, obviously, like everybody knows about the infamous kind of rape scene and whatnot, which is awful, obviously. But the actual film itself, some of the scenery, and just, bearing in mind it was what, 72, 74, something like that. The cinematography and the way the light was shining on the water and all of those kind of things. And there's some mirror shots and things. It's just stunning. And now I watch things through that point of view, and I'm like, where's that camera? How did I get that placement? What was I doing there, kind of thing? And it's fascinating now to be able to watch these things and be like, when we watched Terrifier 2, I was like, wow, how did Damien get that blood spurting up there? How did they do that? And it's fantastic. It's like, it's given me a whole new appreciation for something which I already loved. It's brilliant.
Yeah, you mentioned Hammer Films at the outset of this. Another good friend of mine, who is a big fan of Dog Soldiers, Aaron, he introduced me to Hammer Films a few years ago. Now we do a monthly series where we look at, Hammer movies.
Oh,
And
wow.
I had not watched, I'd heard of them, but I'd never watched them because I thought, oh, these are cheesy 1970s, like terrible movies, until about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And now I'm watching them, having grown up loving horror. I can see, oh, this is where this modern franchise probably got that idea from. These wonderful character actors that I've seen in other things. This is kind of where
Yeah.
they got their start. It's a great journey. And that's why one of the things I love about horror is it's a multifaceted, multi-generational genre that
Yes.
has a lot to offer. And sometimes people just don't quite appreciate that, I think, the way they should. And that's one of the reasons I also love what you're doing, through your art, through your writing, through evangelizing Dog Soldiers through Sausages, is really opening people up to say, this isn't exactly what you think it is. If you've never given this a shot, please do, because there's a lot here.
Oh,
So
definitely. Yeah.
Janine, thank you so much for hanging out and talking. I know you're in the UK in Swindon right now, and I'm here in Skokie, Illinois. There's a big time difference. I imagine it's either your bedtime or time for you to go start writing or answering emails about your next production. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you. It's been brilliant. I've talked non-stop. It's the thing when you get me started, I'm just like, rah, 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 to say thank you for putting up with it.
Oh no, it makes my job a lot easier.
This is true.
But yeah, well, at some point, I'd love to have you back on again and talk movies and all that good stuff. But until then, how can people, like, where can they find you? How can they keep up and support your work?
While Twitter is still a thing, that's definitely where I hang out the most, which is just Janine Pipe 28. And just in case it does all burn down, I'm also Janine Pipe 28 over on Instagram as well. So that's the best places to find me. And if you were at all interested in my work, I've at Amazon for the books, and then I've also got an internet movie database page. So when those films do become available, it's all on there as well.
Excellent. Well, I'll post links to all that stuff down below. And yeah, thanks again. Good luck and congratulations on everything. The future is yours.
Oh,
I think that was the end of Scarface. Hopefully you don't
yeah,
end up like Tony Montana, but anyhow, that was an awkward way to end the show. So I'm just going to say thanks again and goodbye.
thank you.